Welcome to Forbiddenlovestorychannel, where secrets ignite and hearts break. In sleepy Willow Creek, Oregon, Emily's quiet life unravels when Riley, young, reckless, electric, steps in. Her marriage to steady Nathan fades to routine, but Riley's gaze sparks a forbidden fire. What begins as stolen glances explodes into betrayal, threatening to burn it all down. Can she hide the truth, or will it shatter everything? This is no simple romance. It's a raw, messy dive into desire, guilt, and redemption. I never imagined my life would unravel like this. My name is Emily Harper, and at 34, I thought I had it all figured out. For 9 years, I'd been married to Nathan, a steady, warm-hearted man who anchored our quiet existence in a sleepy Oregon town called Willow Creek. Our home sat nestled among towering pines, a cozy craftsman with a wraparound porch where the scent of damp earth and cedar lingered in the air. Life felt predictable, safe even. We had decent jobs. Me as a freelance graphic designer, Nathan as a forest ranger, and a tight-knit circle of friends who'd wave from their porches as we strolled by. On the surface, it was a picture-perfect American dream. But beneath that glossy veneer, something gnawed at me, a restless ache I couldn't name. Looking back, I see it now. That stability was a fragile illusion, a house of cards waiting for a gust to topple it. I craved a jolt, a spark to shake me awake and remind me what it felt like to truly live. My story isn't one of grand heroics. It's a jagged stumble along the razor-thin edge between loyalty and longing, between the woman I vowed to be and the one clawing to break free. Nathan was everything you'd want in a husband, dependable, thoughtful, solid as the ancient oaks that lined our street. His hazel eyes crinkled when he laughed, and his hands, rough from years of hauling gear through the wilderness, still softened when they brushed mine. We'd built a life together, one I'd once adored. But somewhere along the way, the fire that had drawn us together flickered out. Our days blurred into a monotony of routines, dinner at 6, TV at 8, bed by 10. I'd catch myself staring out the kitchen window, the steam from my coffee curling upward, wondering when the thrill had slipped away. Then came Riley, Nathan's 22-year-old cousin, crashing into our world like a rogue wave. It was late June when he rolled into town, fresh out of his sophomore year at a college in California. He'd begged to spend the summer with us, claiming he needed a break from dorm life and city chaos. Nathan, ever the generous soul, didn't hesitate to say yes. I didn't think much of it at first, just another family visit, a chance to play host. But the moment Riley stepped through our door, dragging a beat-up duffel bag and a grin that could melt ice, I felt the air shift. Riley was a force, vibrant, untamed, bursting with a reckless energy that pulsed through our stale little home. He stood over 6 feet, all lean muscle and sun-kissed skin, with messy dark hair that fell into his piercing blue eyes. His smile was a weapon, bold and unapologetic, flashing like lightning across his sharp features. He moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, yet it drew people in, moths to a flame. I wasn't immune. From that first handshake, his grip firm, his gaze lingering, I felt a shiver ripple through me, electric and unnerving. He brought chaos in the best way. Our house, once a tomb of silence broken only by the hum of the fridge, buzzed with his laughter and stories. He'd sprawl on our faded blue couch, regaling us with tales of late-night beach bonfires, failed skateboarding stunts, and the art classes he swore he'd ace next semester. I'd sit across from him, sipping tea, my heart pounding as I hung on every word. Nathan would nod along, chuckling, oblivious to the way Riley's presence ignited something dormant inside me. It started innocently enough. We'd chat over breakfast, me flipping pancakes, him perched on a stool, nursing a mug of black coffee. His voice, low and smooth, wove through the morning stillness, pulling me in. He'd ask about my designs, genuinely curious, his head tilted as if my answers mattered more than anything. I'd blush, fumbling for words, flattered by the attention, With Nathan, conversations had dwindled to logistics, bills, groceries, the weather. But Riley, he made me feel seen, like a version of myself I'd buried under years of duty. The shift was subtle at first, a slow burn I couldn't ignore. I'd catch myself lingering in the kitchen, hoping he'd wander in. And he did, often. We'd lean against the counter, trading banter about nothing and everything, the space between us crackling with unspoken tension. His eyes would lock onto mine, bold and searching, holding me captive a beat too long. My stomach would flip, a wild mix of exhilaration and dread. I'd tell myself it was harmless, just a flicker of excitement in my grey routine. But deep down, I knew I was wading into dangerous waters. One humid afternoon, as I chopped vegetables for dinner, Riley sauntered in, shirt sleeves rolled up, a bead of sweat tracing his jaw. He leaned against the fridge, watching me with a quiet intensity that made my knife falter. "You're incredible, Emily," he said, his voice soft but searing. "The way you make this place feel alive, it's special." My breath caught, the compliment sinking into me like a stone. I laughed it off, brushing hair from my flushed face, but his words lingered, heavy and intoxicating. Our moments grew bolder, more reckless. I'd find excuses to be near him, watering the garden while he lounged on the porch, stealing glances as he sketched in a notebook. His laughter would drift through the air, bright and infectious, and I'd feel my resolve crumble. With him, I was lighter, freer, unshackled from the weight of expectations I'd carried for years. It terrified me, how effortlessly he unraveled me, how desperately I craved it. One evening, with Nathan delayed by a late shift, Riley suggested a walk to the creek behind our house. The sky glowed amber, the water shimmering under a sinking sun. We sat on the bank, reeds brushing our legs, and talked about dreams, fears, the messy beauty of life. His voice dipped low, husky with feeling. "I'm glad I'm here with you," he murmured, his knee grazing mine. That touch, innocent yet deliberate, set my pulse racing, a wildfire roaring through my veins. I knew then, this wasn't just a passing thrill, it was a turning point, a spark I couldn't extinguish. As we walked back, the twilight wrapping us in its hush, I felt the truth settle in my bones. Riley had cracked open something inside me, something raw, hungry, and alive. I was teetering on the edge of a choice that could shatter everything I'd built. And God help me, I wasn't sure I wanted to step back. The days after that creekside confession stretched taut like a bowstring ready to snap. I, Emily Harper, stood at the heart of a storm I'd summoned, torn between the life I'd vowed to uphold and the reckless pull of Riley's orbit. Willow Creek shimmered under the relentless July sun, the air thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers. But inside me, a restless tempest churned. Nathan trudged on in blissful ignorance, his ranger boots thumping across our hardwood floors, while I wrestled with a secret that scorched my soul. Riley's presence had become a drug, intoxicating, addictive, impossible to shake. Every morning I'd drift downstairs, my heart thudding with a wild hope that he'd be there, sprawled at the kitchen table with that lazy, heart-stopping grin. And he always was. We'd sip coffee, the steam curling between us like a fragile veil, our conversations dancing from mundane chatter to raw, unguarded truths. His voice, smooth as river stones, sank into me, stirring a hunger I hadn't known I still possessed. I'd catch his gaze, those blue eyes sharp and knowing, and feel my defenses splinter, a dam cracking under pressure. Nathan noticed nothing. He'd shuffle in, bleary-eyed from late patrols, pecking my cheek with a distracted warmth before disappearing into his routine. I'd smile, my lips tight, guilt gnawing at my insides like a ravenous beast. He was good, too good, maybe, and I hated myself for how his steady kindness felt like a cage. With Riley, I soared. With Nathan, I stagnated. The contrast clawed at me, a relentless ache that left me breathless. Our stolen moments grew bolder, more perilous. One afternoon, as I knelt in the garden, yanking weeds from the sun-baked soil, Riley appeared, his shadow falling over me like a dare. "Need a hand?" he asked, his tone teasing, laced with something darker. I nodded, my pulse hammering, and soon we were side by side, dirt-streaked and laughing, our fingers brushing as we tugged at roots. His touch, electric, fleeting, sent a jolt through me, a wildfire racing up my spine. I'd glance at him, his jaw tight with focus, and feel my resolve dissolve, liquid and useless. That evening, with Nathan stuck at the ranger station, Riley and I ventured to the creek again. The moon hung low, a silver lantern casting fractured light across the water. We sat on a mossy log, the night alive with crickets and the rustle of leaves. He turned to me, his gaze piercing, unguarded. "You ever feel like you're meant for more than this?" he asked, his voice a quiet thunder. I swallowed, my throat dry, the question slicing through my carefully built walls. "All the time," I whispered, my words trembling with truth. He shifted closer, his knee pressing against mine, and I felt it. A spark, a tether, a promise I couldn't unmake. His hand found mine, warm and sure, and I didn't pull away. My heart roared, a frantic drumbeat drowning out the world. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Emily," he said, his breath grazing my ear. The words sank deep, branding me, and when his lips brushed mine, soft, tentative, then fierce, I ignited. The kiss was a revelation, a collision of longing and surrender, tasting of summer and sin. I melted into him, my hands clutching his shirt, every nerve ablaze. When we broke apart, his eyes mirrored my own, wild, terrified, alive. I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave as I stumbled back to the house, my lips still tingling, my mind a chaotic swirl. I collapsed onto the couch, hands pressed to my face, shame searing my chest. What had I done? Nathan's face flashed before me, his trusting smile, his calloused hands, and I choked on a sob. But Riley's touch lingered, a phantom heat I couldn't banish, and part of me, a selfish, ravenous part, didn't want to. The next day, I tried to bury it. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until my knuckles ached, avoiding Riley's gaze as he lingered nearby. But he was relentless, a magnet I couldn't resist. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, probing. I nodded, my throat tight, but his hand grazed my arm, and I flinched, desire and dread warring within me. "We can't pretend that didn't happen," he murmured, stepping closer. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but instead I leaned into him, my body betraying my mind. Our secret unfurled like a dark bloom. When Nathan was out, we'd meet, in the garden, the kitchen, the shadowed corners of the house, each encounter a stolen breath, a tightening coil of risk. His laughter would wrap around me, buoyant and free, and I'd feel myself unravel, thread by thread. We'd talk for hours, his dreams of art and adventure clashing with my tethered life, and I'd marvel at how he saw me, not a wife, not a shadow, but a woman blazing with possibility. One night, under a star-streaked sky, we slipped away to a park on the edge of town. The air was cool, the grass damp beneath our feet, and as we walked, his hand found mine, firm and unyielding. "I'm falling for you, Emily," he confessed, his voice raw, vulnerable. My heart lurched, a dizzying mix of joy and terror. "Me too," I admitted, the words spilling out like a flood. We kissed again, urgent and deep, the world fading to a distant hum. It was wrong, so wrong, but it felt like salvation, a lifeline in a sea of grey. Returning home, I faced Nathan across the dinner table, his voice a steady drone about fire breaks and trails. I nodded, my smile brittle, while Riley sat opposite, his calm facade masking the storm we shared. My mind screamed warnings, but my heart raced with a defiant thrill. I was trapped, a tightrope walker swaying above an abyss, and every step with Riley pushed me closer to the edge. As the weeks bled into August, I knew I couldn't keep this up. The lies festered, a poison seeping into my bones. Nathan deserved better, truth at least, but Riley had burrowed into me, a route I couldn't rip out. I stood at a crossroads, the weight of my choices crushing me, and I wondered how long I could dance this dangerous waltz before it all came crashing down. Summer in Willow Creek bled into August, the days stretching long and heavy, each one a taut wire threatening to snap. I stood at the epicenter of my own unraveling, drowning in a sea of my own making. The air hung thick with the scent of sun-scorched pine and the distant hum of cicadas. But inside our craftsman home, a suffocating silence festered. Nathan moved through our routines with his unshakable calm, oblivious to the inferno raging beneath my skin, while Riley, bold, reckless Riley, wove himself deeper into my every thought, a thread I couldn't sever. Our secret had grown claws, sharp and unrelenting, digging into me with every stolen glance, every whispered word. I'd catch Riley's eye across the breakfast table, his blue gaze smouldering with a quiet fire, and my heart would lurch, a wild, frantic thing clawing at its cage. Nathan would sip his coffee, murmuring about trail maintenance or the latest wildfire scare, and I'd nod, my smile a brittle mask, guilt gnashing at my insides like a starved wolf. I hated how easy it was to deceive him, how his trust, steady, unwavering, felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Riley and I danced a dangerous waltz, our steps growing bolder, more desperate. When Nathan's ranger shift stretched late into the night, we'd seize the hours. Furtive meetings in the garden, where the roses Nathan and I had planted years ago mocked me with their faded blooms, or hushed conversations on the porch, the creak of the swing a heartbeat to our forbidden rhythm. His touch, light, electric, would graze my arm, and I'd ignite, a spark racing through me, consuming every shred of restraint. "You're all I think about," he'd murmur, his voice a low growl that sank into my bones, and I'd crumble, helpless against the tide of him. One sweltering afternoon, with Nathan away on a training drill, Riley cornered me in the kitchen. I was rinsing dishes, the water scalding my hands, when he stepped close, too close, his breath warm against my neck. "We can't keep pretending," he said, his words a jagged blade slicing through the haze. I froze, soap suds dripping onto the counter, my pulse hammering a frantic SOS. "I know," I rasped, turning to face him, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, unyielding pull. He kissed me then, hard and hungry, and I drowned in it, his lips a storm, his hands anchoring me to a truth I couldn't outrun. When we broke apart, gasping, I saw my own fear reflected in his gaze, a mirror to the chaos we'd unleashed. The guilt was a living thing now, writhing and relentless, clawing at me in the quiet hours. I'd lie awake beside Nathan, his steady breathing a cruel counterpoint to my racing thoughts, and imagine confessing, spilling the ugly truth and watching his world shatter. But then Riley would appear the next morning, tousled and radiant, and my resolve would dissolve, a sandcastle swept away by the tide. I was addicted, hooked on the rush of him, the way he made me feel alive, untamed, wanted. It was selfish, shameful, but I couldn't stop. Our rendezvous grew reckless, a tightrope walk over an abyss. One evening, we slipped away to a secluded clearing beyond the creek, the forest swallowing us in its shadowed embrace. The air buzzed with the scent of moss and earth, the sky a bruised purple streaked with stars. Riley pulled me close, his hands firm, possessive, and whispered, "I love you, Emily." The words hit me like a thunderclap, raw and reverberating, shaking loose every fragile excuse I'd clung to. "I love you too," I choked out, my voice trembling with the weight of it, and we kissed, a fierce, desperate collision that sealed our fate. It wasn't just passion, it was a bond, deep and undeniable, and it terrified me. But reality loomed, a spectre I couldn't ignore. Nathan's absences grew shorter, his presence a constant reminder of the life I was betraying. One night, as we sat over a dinner I'd painstakingly prepared, roast chicken and mashed potatoes, a feeble attempt to rekindle what we'd lost, he squinted at me across the table, his hazel eyes narrowing. "You okay, Em? You've been off lately." His voice was gentle, probing, and I flinched, the fork trembling in my hand. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like glass, brittle and ready to shatter. Riley sat across from us, his expression neutral, but I felt his gaze burning into me, a silent plea I couldn't answer. The lie festered, a poison seeping through my veins. I couldn't keep this up, living two lives, one foot in loyalty, the other in longing. Riley sensed it too. "We need to figure this out," he said one afternoon, his voice tight as we stood in the garden, the sun dipping low. "I can't lose you, but I can't keep sneaking around." His words stung, a brutal truth I'd dodged too long. "I know," I whispered, my chest aching, "but I don't know how to fix this without breaking everything." He nodded, his jaw clenched, and we stood there, two souls tangled in a web of our own spinning. The breaking point came when Riley's summer stay neared its end. He'd rented a studio in Portland, an hour away, and planned to leave after Labor Day. The thought of him gone hollowed me out, a gaping void I couldn't face. On his last day, as he packed his duffel, Nathan clapped him on the shoulder, all warm smiles and goodbyes, while I lingered in the doorway, my heart a frantic drumbeat. Riley's eyes met mine, a silent vow shimmering between us, and I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Days later, a text from him lit up my phone. "Miss you, Em. Come to Portland for a weekend. It'll be worth it." My breath hitched, temptation roaring through me like a freight train. I told Nathan I had a client meeting, another lie, slick and easy, and drove to Portland, my hands trembling on the wheel. Riley greeted me at his door, his smile a beacon in the dusk, and I fell into his arms, the world fading to a distant hum. We spent 2 days cocooned in his tiny apartment, cooking pasta, laughing over jazz records, kissing until time blurred. "I want us to be real," he said one night, his voice fierce. "No more hiding." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes, knowing I couldn't keep running. Returning to Willow Creek, the weight of it all crushed me. Nathan's trusting gaze haunted me, a mirror to my deceit. I couldn't live this lie anymore. The guilt was a vice, squeezing until I couldn't breathe. One evening, as the house settled into its familiar hush, I sat Nathan down at the kitchen table, my heart pounding a brutal rhythm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quaking, raw with dread. He frowned, leaning forward, his hands clasped tight. "What's wrong?" "Eh?" I took a shuddering breath, the words clawing their way out. "I've done something terrible, Nathan. I had an affair." His face froze, a mask of shock, and I pressed on, desperate to purge it all. "It was with Riley." The silence that followed was deafening, a void swallowing us whole. His eyes darkened, his fists whitening as he gripped the table. "You're telling me you slept with my cousin?" His voice cracked, a jagged edge of rage and pain slicing through me. "How could you? Emily!" Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless. "I don't know why it happened," I sobbed, "but I'm so sorry. I want to fix this if you'll let me." But his expression hardened, a wall slamming down between us. "Fix this?" He spat, standing so fast the chair screeched against the floor. "You think an apology undoes this? You betrayed me, destroyed us." His words were a hammer, smashing my hopes to dust. "I can't forgive you. Pack your stuff and get out. I don't want you here." I staggered upstairs, sobs racking my body as I shoved clothes into a suitcase. Each item, a sweater he'd bought me, a photo from our hiking days, felt like a shard of the life I'd torched. Nathan stood in the doorway, his silhouette cold, unyielding, and when I whispered, "I'm so sorry," he turned away, a stranger in the shell of my husband. I left that night, the door clicking shut behind me, a final note in the symphony of my ruin. I rented a cramped apartment in downtown Willow Creek, the walls closing in as I sank into solitude. The first days were a fog, hours spent staring at nothing, replaying every mistake, every kiss, every lie. Nathan filed for divorce within a week, the papers a cold, legal dagger to my heart. I'd lost him, lost Riley, lost myself. The silence was suffocating, a tomb for my regrets, and I knew I'd have to claw my way out or drown in it. The door clicked shut behind me that night, a hollow echo that severed me from the life I'd known. Willow Creek loomed around me, its quiet streets and whispering pines a cruel mockery of the peace I'd torched. Nathan's final words, "I don't want you here," rang in my ears, a relentless dirge as I dragged my suitcase to a dingy apartment in the town's heart. The walls were thin, the air stale with the ghosts of past tenants, and I collapsed onto a sagging couch, my chest heaving with sobs that tore through me like a storm. Those first days were a blur, a suffocating haze of grief and self-loathing. I'd stare at the cracked ceiling, the silence pressing down like a shroud, replaying every misstep, Riley's electric touch, Nathan's trusting smile, the lies that had unraveled me. My phone buzzed with missed calls from friends, their voices a distant hum I couldn't face. Shame gnawed at me, a ravenous beast, and I curled into myself, a broken thing drowning in the wreckage of my choices. The divorce papers arrived within days, Nathan's signature a cold, final slash across our shared history. I signed them with trembling hands, tears staining the ink, each stroke a nail in the coffin of my past. Willow Creek moved on without me. Kids pedaled bikes down Main Street, the bakery wafted cinnamon into the air. But I was a spectre, haunting my own life. I'd lost everything. Nathan, my anchor. Riley, my wildfire. The home we'd built with laughter and dreams. The guilt was a lead weight, crushing my lungs, and I wondered how I'd let a fleeting spark incinerate it all. I avoided mirrors, terrified of the hollow-eyed stranger staring back, and slept fitfully, nightmares of Nathan's rage and Riley's fading smile jolting me awake. But the emptiness grew claws, sharp and insistent, prodding me to move or perish. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, I sat with a tepid cup of tea, the steam curling like a lifeline. I couldn't keep rotting here, wallowing in self-pity. I had to claw my way out. The next day, I called a therapist, my voice quaking as I booked an appointment. It felt like surrender, admitting I was shattered, but I was desperate for a thread to hold on to. The first session was brutal, a raw excavation of my soul. Dr. Lena Carter, a soft-spoken woman with greying hair and piercing eyes, sat across from me in a cluttered office that smelled of lavender and old books. "Why are you here, Emily?" she asked, her tone gentle but unyielding. I choked on the words, tears spilling as I spilled it all, the affair, the betrayal, the divorce. "I destroyed everything," I rasped, my hands twisting in my lap. "I don't know how to live with myself." She nodded, her gaze steady, and said, "You can't undo the past, but you can learn to carry it." Let's start there. Therapy was a jagged climb, each step scraping me raw. I hated facing my weaknesses, my selfishness, my cowardice, but Dr. Carter's quiet strength coaxed me forward. "You're not a monster," she'd say, her voice a balm. "You're human, and humans falter." Slowly, I began to unravel the tangle of my emotions, the restlessness that had driven me to Riley, the neglect I'd let fester with Nathan, the lies I'd told myself to justify it all. I learned to name my guilt, to hold it without letting it define me, and piece by piece, I started to forgive the woman I'd become. Life crept back in, tentative and fragile. I laced up my running shoes one crisp morning, the air biting my lungs as I jogged along the creek. The rhythm of my steps steadied me, the forest's hush a soft reprieve from my churning thoughts. I'd pause by the water, watching it ripple under the dawn, and feel a flicker of peace, small, fleeting, but real. I rediscovered simple joys, the weight of a book in my hands, the warmth of coffee on my tongue, the laughter of strangers in the park. They were lifelines, pulling me from the abyss. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into freelance projects, my laptop glowing late into the night as I sketched logos and layouts. My colleagues, bless them, offered quiet support, no judgment in their nods or smiles. "You've got this, Em," my friend Jess would text, and I'd cling to those words like a raft. A new client, a local cafe needing a rebrand, sparked something in me, pride, purpose, and I poured my fractured energy into it, watching my designs take shape like a phoenix rising from ash. One rainy afternoon, sorting through a box of old keepsakes, I found a photo album, Nathan and me grinning on a hike, our faces sunlit and carefree. My chest ached, a dull throb of loss, but I didn't toss it. Those memories were mine, flawed and faded, and I tucked the album onto a shelf, a quiet nod to the life we'd shared. I thought of Riley too, his wild grin, his reckless hope, and wondered where he'd landed. We hadn't spoken since I'd ended it, a curt text that severed our thread. "I can't do this anymore, Riley. I need to fix what's left." I didn't hate him. We'd both stumbled, both chosen. I hoped he'd found his own light. Reconnecting with the world was a slow thaw. I met Jess for coffee one grey morning, her hug warm and forgiving as I stammered through my story. "You messed up, Em, but you're still you," she said, her eyes kind. My parents called, their voices cautious but steady, and I let their love seep back in, a balm to my battered heart. I wasn't ready for pity or preaching, but their presence stitched me together, thread by fragile thread. Time softened the edges, though the scars remained. Months bled into a year, and I adapted to this new skin, alone but not adrift. My apartment, once a prison, became a haven. Plants on the sill, a rug I'd splurged on, a space I'd claimed as mine. I'd sit on the fire escape some nights, the town twinkling below, and feel a quiet strength blooming inside me. Not the old Emily, not the reckless one, but a woman forged anew, tempered by fire and regret. The lessons crystallized, sharp and unyielding. I'd torched my marriage for a fleeting blaze, chasing a thrill that left only ashes. Honesty, trust, the slow burn of real love, I'd taken them for granted, and the cost was a chasm I'd never bridge. Nathan's forgiveness was a ghost I'd never grasp, and Riley's love a mirage I'd chased too far. But I could move forward, wiser, bruised but breathing. One evening, as spring unfurled over Willow Creek, I sat with a notebook, pen trembling in my hand. I wrote not for Nathan, not for Riley, but for anyone who'd listen. Don't shatter your life for a spark that fades. Cherish what's steady, what's true. Mistakes cut deep, and the fallout lingers. Pause before you leap, because the pieces don't fit back the same. My words were a plea, a prayer, born from the wreckage I'd sifted through. If my story spared one soul that pain, it'd be enough. I closed the notebook, the creek glinting through my window, and felt a fragile peace settle over me. Life stretched ahead, messy, uncertain, mine to rebuild. I'd lost a husband, a lover, a home, but I'd found something else. A resolve to live honestly, to value the quiet beauty of what endures. The road was long, the weight still heavy, but I took a step, then another, into a dawn I'd earned the hard way. August draped Willow Creek in a heavy, restless haze, the air thick with unspoken tension that mirrored the chaos churning within. Summer's end loomed, a deadline pressing against the fragile shell of a life teetering on collapse. Nathan moved through the craftsman home with his familiar, grounding cadence, boots scuffing the porch, voice rumbling over morning coffee, while Riley's shadow lingered, a persistent echo that refused to fade. The affair had spiraled into a tempest, a reckless dance of stolen moments that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Clarity emerged slowly, a faint pulse beneath the roar of guilt and longing. The truth clawed its way to the surface. This couldn't continue. Riley had sparked something fierce, a blaze that shattered the monotony of routine, but it was a fleeting illusion, wild, unsustainable, built on borrowed time. Nathan, with his steady hands and quiet strength, deserved better than a fractured vow whispered in the dark. Shame gnawed relentlessly, a jagged edge slicing through every justification, whispering that the only way out was to end it, to sever the tie before it dragged the whole world down. The resolve took root in the stillness of sleepless nights, when the house hushed and Nathan's breaths rose and fell beside the bed. Moonlight cut through the blinds, sharp and accusing, illuminating a mind tangled in memories. Riley's fierce kisses by the creek, his voice weaving dreams that burned too bright. Each recollection stung, a bitter reminder of betrayal, and tears soaked the pillow as the heart wrestled with itself. Love for Riley pulsed, raw and undeniable, but it clashed with the deeper, weathered bond to Nathan, a promise forged in years of shared silences and small joys. Ending it felt like amputating a limb, but clinging to it meant drowning in a lie. The moment arrived on a sticky morning, humidity clinging to the skin like regret. Dishes clattered in the sink, scrubbed with a fury that matched the inner storm, when Riley ambled in, hair mussed, grin tentative but electric. "Hey," he said, voice smooth as a riverstone, sending a shiver racing through the air. Hands faltered, the sponge slipping, pulse hammering a desperate rhythm against ribs. "Hey," came the mumbled reply, eyes dodging his, weighed down by the decision trembling on the tongue. He leaned against the counter, close enough to feel the heat of him, and the room shrank, suffocating under the unspoken. "Something's up," he said, tone shifting, a thread of unease weaving through it. A breath shuddered out, fingers gripping the sink's edge for balance, stealing against the flood threatening to break free. "Yeah," the voice cracked, raw and unsteady. Us, it's over, Riley, it has to be. The lying, the hiding, it's killing me. Nathan's my husband, and I can't keep doing this to him, to us." The words spilled out, a jagged torrent, each one a stone dropped into the silence. His face shifted, shock flaring, then dimming into a quiet, piercing hurt. "You're serious?" he asked, voice low, fraying at the edges. Tears prickled, hot and insistent, throat tightening as if strangled. "Dead serious," the reply came, barely above a whisper. "I care about you, too much, but it's wrong. I need to try to fix what's left with Nathan, not tear it apart for something that can't survive." Eyes locked, his blue stare a storm of confusion and pain, searching for a crack to slip through. He stepped closer, hands flexing as if to reach out, then curling back. "I thought we had something real," he said, voice rough, a plea buried in the gravel. "We did," the admission rasped, tears breaking free, streaking down flushed cheeks. "That's why it hurts so much to let go. But I'm splitting myself in half, Riley, and I can't breathe like this. I need to choose. And I'm choosing him." His jaw clenched, a flicker of defiance fading into resignation, shoulders sagging as the fight bled out of him. "Okay," he murmured, stepping back, the distance a chasm widening with every inch. "If that's what you need, I won't push, but it's not easy, letting you go." The words hung heavy, a final thread snapping, and watching him turn, his form retreating into the morning light, felt like a blade, twisting in the gut. Knees buckled, body sinking to the cool tile, sobs erupting in waves that shook the frame. The cord was cut, the lifeline severed, but the relief was drowned by a hollow, aching void. The aftermath stretched thin and brittle, a tightrope strung over a sea of doubt. Riley's presence in the house dimmed, his laughter stifled, his glances averted, a ghost drifting through the edges of awareness. Nathan sensed the shift, his hazel eyes narrowing over dinner, voice soft but probing. "You've been quiet lately," he said, fork pausing midair. A smile flickered, forced and fragile, masking the turmoil churning beneath. "Just worn out," the lie slipped out, tasting of ash, a prayer that he wouldn't glimpse the storm raging behind the facade. Efforts redoubled, meals cooked with care, evenings spent nestled close, anything to stoke the fading ember of what once was. Yet the secret lingered, a shadow cast long and unyielding. Ending things with Riley hadn't erased the stain, it had buried it deeper, a festering wound throbbing beneath the surface. The garden became a refuge, roses drooping in silent judgment, their wilted petals a mirror to the decay within. Nathan's trust, unwavering, undeserved, pressed down, a weight that threatened to crush the fragile shell holding it all together. The truth gnawed, insistent and merciless. He deserved honesty, not this half-life of deception. Confessing loomed, a spectre of dread coiling tight, but the burden of silence grew too heavy to bear. One evening, as the sun sank below the pines, casting the kitchen in a golden glow, resolve hardened. Half measures wouldn't mend this. A full reckoning was the only path left. Hands trembled setting the table, plates clinking like a countdown to judgment. Nathan would walk through the door soon, and the words would spill. Riley, the betrayal, the desperate plea for forgiveness. Fear clawed at the throat, a cold sweat beading on the skin, but beneath it flickered a spark of hope, that bearing it all, raw and unfiltered, might salvage something from the ashes. The storm brewed, dark and inevitable, and the heart braced for impact, ready to face the fallout or be swept away. The sink gleamed under restless hands, water swirling down the drain as the mind churned. Outside, the creek glittered faintly, a distant promise of calm that felt unreachable. The reflection in the window stared back, eyes shadowed, lips tight, a woman on the brink, clinging to the choice made. Riley was gone from the equation, but the real test loomed. Telling Nathan, laying the wreckage at his feet, and begging for a chance to rebuild. The road ahead promised thorns, each step a gamble on trust shattered and reclaimed. But retreat wasn't an option. The die was cast, the thread cut, and all that remained was to stand in the truth, broken but resolute. August's end cast a restless gloom over Willow Creek, the pines swaying under a sky heavy with unshed rain. The craftsman home stood silent, its walls a fragile shell cradling a secret too volatile to contain. Nathan's boots thudded across the porch each evening, a steady rhythm that once soothed, now grating against nerves frayed to breaking. Riley had faded into memory, his departure a quiet wound. But the truth of what had transpired lingered, a smouldering ember poised to ignite. Ending the affair hadn't extinguished the betrayal, it had only buried it deeper, a festering ache gnawing at the soul. Resolve hardened in the quiet hours, a decision forged in sleepless nights beside Nathan's unsuspecting form. The lie couldn't hold. Its weight crushed the chest, a relentless pressure demanding release. Honesty loomed, terrifying and inevitable, a jagged blade that might sever the last threads of a fraying marriage. Nathan deserved the truth, not the hollow shell of a wife who smiled through her shame. The heart raced, a wild drumbeat echoing through sleepless vigils, plotting the words that would spill it all. Riley, the stolen moments, the regret that now consumed every breath. The moment arrived on a Thursday evening, the air thick with the scent of impending storm. Hands trembled setting the kitchen table, forks clinking like a countdown to ruin. Nathan would be home soon, his ranger shift winding down, and the confession waited, coiled tight in the throat. The plan was simple yet brutal. Sit him down, bare the soul, and plead for a chance to mend what had been shattered. Fear clawed at the gut, a cold dread pooling in the veins, but silence was no longer an option. It was a prison, and the truth the only key. The door creaked open, Nathan's frame filling the threshold, his hazel eyes crinkling with a tired smile. "Hey," he said, voice warm, shedding his jacket with a rustle. A nod answered, lips tight, forcing a greeting past the lump strangling the voice. "Hey, can we talk?" The question hung, sharp and unsteady, cutting through the mundane. His brow furrowed, curiosity tinged with unease, and he sank into a chair, hands clasped on the table. "Sure, what's going on?" A breath shuddered out, the room shrinking as the walls pressed in. "Something big," the voice rasped, raw and quaking, hands gripping the chair's edge for anchor. "Please, just listen till I'm done." His nod came slow, eyes narrowing, a flicker of apprehension shadowing his face. The words clawed free, a torrent unleashed after months of restraint. "I messed up, Nathan, badly. I had an affair." His expression froze, a mask of disbelief hardening into stone, and the air thickened, suffocating. "With who?" he asked, voice low, a tremor of dread lacing the steel. The name stuck, a bitter shard lodged in the throat, but it had to be said. "Riley," came the whisper, barely audible, eyes dropping to the table as shame burned hot across the skin. Silence crashed down, a deafening void swallowing the room, broken only by the faint creak of his chair. His fists clenched, knuckles whitening, the tension radiating like a storm about to break. "You slept with my cousin?" The words erupted, raw and jagged, a mix of rage and pain slicing through the stillness. His face twisted, shock morphing into a grim, unyielding fury, and the heart sank, a stone plummeting into an abyss. "How could you?" he demanded, voice cracking, rising as the chair scraped back with a screech. Tears welled, hot and relentless, spilling down flushed cheeks, hands trembling as they rose in a futile plea. "I don't know." The sob broke free, ragged and desperate. "It just happened and I hate myself for it. I'm so sorry, I want to fix this. If you'll let me." His gaze darkened, a cold wall slamming down, shutting out the words. "Fix this?" he spat, venom lacing the syllables, his frame towering as he loomed over the table. "You think sorry undoes this? You betrayed me, Emily, ripped apart everything we had." Each accusation landed like a blow, shattering the fragile hope that had flickered within. "I trusted you," he snarled, voice fracturing, "and you threw it away for him." The room spun, a dizzying whirl of guilt and despair, the floor tilting beneath unsteady feet. "Please," the plea rasped, voice breaking under the weight of tears, "give me a chance. I ended it. I chose you." But his face remained implacable, a fortress of hurt and rage, eyes glinting with a resolve that chilled the blood. "No," he said, shaking his head, voice firm as iron. "I can't look at you without seeing him. Pack your stuff and get out. This is done." The finality struck, a thunderclap reverberating through the bones, and the world crumbled, a house of cards collapsing into dust. Legs staggered upstairs, sobs racking the body as hands shoved clothes into a suitcase. Each item, a scarf he'd gifted, a photo from brighter days, felt like a shard of a life irretrievably lost. Nathan stood in the doorway, his silhouette rigid, gaze averted, a stranger where a husband once stood. "I'm sorry," the whisper slipped out, faint and broken. But his silence roared louder, a wall of ice unyielding to the plea. The suitcase zipped shut, a final note in the dirge, and feet dragged down the stairs. The doors click a guillotine, severing the past. The night swallowed the figure retreating into Willow Creek's shadowed streets, suitcase wheels rattling over cracked pavement. Rain began to fall, soft and mournful, soaking through the jacket as the town blurred into a watercolor of loss. The apartment waited, a cramped, sterile box downtown, its thin walls closing in as the couch became a refuge, a tomb for the wreckage within. Tears flowed unchecked, a river carving through the hollowed chest, the mind replaying his fury, her failure, the moment trust turned to ash. Divorce papers arrived days later, Nathan's signature a cold, legal blade slicing through what remained. Hands shook signing them, ink blurring with tears, each stroke a nail in the coffin of a life once cherished. The finality sank in, a leaden weight dragging the spirit down, husband gone, home lost, self fractured. The affair with Riley had been a spark, a fleeting blaze that torched the foundation, and now the ashes lay scattered, irreparable. Friends called, voices distant through the fog, but shame barred the door, a solitary prison of regret. The kitchen became a vigil, tea cooling untouched as eyes stared blankly at the rain-streaked window. Guilt pulsed, a relentless tide washing over the wreckage. Nathan's broken trust, Riley's faded hope, a marriage reduced to rubble. The truth had been laid bare, a brutal purging that left only devastation in its wake. No forgiveness waited, no second chance glimmered. The confession had razed it all, leaving a barren field where love once grew. Willow Creek carried on, kids laughed in the streets. The creek shimmered under dawn's light, but the soul drifted, unmoored, a ghost in its own story. The choice to confess had been a gamble, a desperate bid to salvage something from the lies. But it had backfired, a bomb detonating the fragile remains. Now, alone in the silence, the heart mourned, grappling with the cost of truth too late, a lesson carved in scars that would never fully heal. The door's final click reverberated through Willow Creek's rain-soaked night, a hollow knell marking the end of a life once known. The craftsman home faded into the rear view, its porch lights swallowed by shadows as the suitcase rattled toward a new exile. Downtown's cramped apartment awaited, a sterile box with peeling paint and a sagging couch, its walls closing in like a vice. Rain pattered against the window, a mournful rhythm syncing with the sobs that shook the frame, tears carving rivers through a face hollowed by loss. Nathan's cold silhouette lingered in memory, his words, "Get out," a lash that flayed the spirit raw. Days blurred into a suffocating fog, time stretching thin and meaningless. The couch became a refuge, a tomb where hours dissolved into staring at cracked plaster, the mind a relentless reel of ruin. Nathan's rage replayed, his fists clenched, his trust shattered, each frame a dagger twisting deeper. Riley's ghost hovered too, his blue eyes dimming with the end, a love snuffed out by choice. The affair had been a spark, a reckless flare that torched the foundation, leaving only ashes to sift through. Guilt gnawed, a voracious beast, feasting on what little remained of resolve. The town bustled beyond the window, kids peddling bikes, the bakery's cinnamon scent wafting through, but it felt distant, a world moving on while the soul stagnated. Friends called, their voices muffled through the haze, but shame barred the door, a lock forged in self-loathing. The phone buzzed unanswered, piling up with concern too heavy to face. Nathan's divorce papers landed like a guillotine, his signature a stark, final cut severing years of shared dreams. Hands trembled signing them, tears blurring the ink, each stroke a nail sealing the past shut. The marriage was gone, husband, home, a life once cherished, all reduced to rubble by a fleeting betrayal. Nights stretched long and jagged, sleep a fleeting guest interrupted by nightmares. Nathan's accusing glare, Riley's fading smile, a chorus of regret that jolted the body awake. The mirror reflected a stranger, eyes sunken, cheeks gaunt, a shell hollowed by its own hand. Questions circled, relentless and unyielding. How had it come to this? Why had stability been traded for a mirage? The affair with Riley had promised freedom, a rush of life through numb veins, but it delivered only wreckage, a lesson carved in the debris of a broken vow. The apartment's silence grew oppressive, a weight pressing against the chest, urging movement or collapse. One grey dawn, the couch creaked as feet hit the floor, a tentative step toward breaking the spiral. A tea kettle whistled, steam curling upward, and hands cradled the mug, seeking warmth in its burn. The mind churned, sifting through the ashes. Nathan's quiet kindness, Riley's reckless pull, the lies that bridged them. Self-pity wouldn't rebuild what was lost. Action might. A phone call was placed, voice quaking. To a therapist's office, a lifeline tossed into the void. Dr. Lena Carter's office smelled of lavender and worn pages, a cluttered sanctuary where the truth could unfurl. "What brought you here?" she asked, her grey eyes piercing yet soft, cutting through the fog. Words stumbled out, betrayal, divorce. A life imploded, tears streaking as the story spilled, raw and unfiltered. "Everything's gone," the voice cracked, hands twisting in the lap. "The guilt, it's eating me alive." Her nod was steady, a quiet anchor. "You've lost a lot," she said, "but you're still here. Let's figure out how to carry it." Sessions peeled back layers, a slow excavation of a fractured self. Shame dominated at first, a thick shroud resisting the light. How could such weakness destroy so much? But Dr. Carter's voice cut through, calm and unrelenting. "Mistakes don't erase you, they shape you." The affair's roots emerged, restlessness festering in routine, a hunger for something more, and with them a grudging acceptance. Nathan's loss stung deepest, his trust a casualty of selfish choices. Yet Riley's absence ached too, a reminder of passion's cost. Forgiveness felt distant, a peak too steep to climb, but the seed of it took root for the flawed, faltering woman who'd stumbled. Days gained tentative rhythm, small steps clawing back from the brink. Running shoes hit the pavement one crisp morning, the creek's shimmer a faint balm as breath burned the lungs. The forest whispered, leaves rustling in time with pounding feet, and a flicker of peace broke through, fragile, fleeting, but real. Work beckoned too. The laptop's glow a lifeline to purpose. Colleagues offered nods, no questions asked, their quiet support a tether pulling the spirit upward. A cafe project, logos, menus, stirred pride, hands steadying as designs took shape, a spark of creation amid the ruin. The apartment's walls held the weight of solitude, a silent witness to the reckoning. One evening, tea cooled untouched as eyes traced the rain's path down the glass. Nathan's face surfaced, his crinkled smile, his steady hands, now lost to a choice that couldn't be undone. Riley's grin flashed too, a memory of reckless joy faded to grey. The heart mourned them both, a dual grief for love squandered and trust betrayed. Reflection turned inward, a mirror held to the wreckage. Stability had been a gift, not a cage, and chasing a thrill had razed it to the ground. The couch creaked again, a notebook pulled close, pen trembling as thoughts bled onto the page. Words formed, a warning, a plea, not for Nathan or Riley, but for anyone listening. Don't trade what's solid for a flame that fades. The cost is steep, the scars lasting. Regret fueled the ink, a hope that this pain might spare another the fall. The creek glimmered outside, a quiet promise of tomorrow, and the soul settled, bruised but breathing, into the ashes of what once was. Spring unfurled over Willow Creek, the pines swaying in a gentle breeze, their whispers a soft counterpoint to the storm that had raged within. The cramped apartment downtown had morphed into a fragile haven, plants thriving on the sill, a rug softening the floor, a space reclaimed from the ashes. Months had bled into a year since Nathan's silhouette vanished from the doorway, since Riley's echo faded into silence. The divorce papers rested in a drawer, a quiet scar of a life dismantled, yet the soul stirred, tempered by the fire of its own making. Reflection carved clarity from chaos. The affair with Riley had been a siren's call, electric, fleeting, promising liberation but delivering ruin. Nathan's steady love, once taken for granted, revealed its worth in absence. A rock eroded by reckless hands. Guilt lingered, a dull ache etched into the bones. But therapy had forged a path through it, Dr. Carter's voice a lantern in the dark. You fell, but you're rising. Running trails by the creek, sketching designs late into the night, reconnecting with friends. These stitched the spirit back, thread by tender thread. Lessons crystallized, sharp and unyielding. Stability wasn't a chain, but a gift. Its quiet strength more enduring than any thrill. Honesty, trust, the slow bloom of real connection. These were treasures squandered in a moment of weakness. Their loss a wound time couldn't fully heal. The pen scratched across a notebook one dusk, words spilling like a confession. Don't chase shadows that fade. They leave only echoes. Pain had been the teacher, regret the ink, and the hope lingered that this tale might shield another from the fall. The story ends here, in the soft light of a new season, the creek glinting beyond the window, a testament to survival, not triumph. The heart carries its scars, but steps forward, lighter, wiser, into a dawn earned through tears. To you listening, a plea, pause before you leap. Cherish what holds you, speak truth when it's hard, and guard the bonds that matter. Mistakes carve deep, but they don't define you. How you rise does. May your path be steadier, your loves truer, your days filled with the peace this journey taught the hard way. Stay kind, stay honest, and here's to brighter tomorrows, yours and mine.